Kathleen Martin is a leading UFO researcher and the author of several books. She's also a featured on-air camera commentator and an international lecturer. Her interest in UFOs and contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a close encounter and subsequent abduction in New Hampshire's White Mountains. Kathleen is the author of the book Captured. She recently updated the book and she's about to join us and talk about it. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello, nice to be with you again.
Great to have you back too. The book Captured, why did you decide to update it?
Well, there has been a great deal of research that was performed after the first book was published. And my publisher contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in updating the book. They thought that it would be a good idea to do that for the 60th anniversary of Betty and Barney Hill's UFO experience. So I agreed to do that, and I had been speaking with and working with various scientists on an update on additional information that was found. And so I'm very excited about all of this.
The book, did you write the book originally in collaboration with Stanton Friedman?
I originally wrote the book in collaboration with Stanton Friedman. I had done a great deal of research over a period of 15 years. I started in about 1990, and I was reading information and also watching television shows that gave information that wasn't consistent with my own memory of what had occurred. I was 13 years old when it happened, and I was there to watch the unfolding of the impact this had on Betty and Barney, the impact it had on them when there was a release of information about their case in 1965, and it was the result of a violation of confidentiality. My uncle Barney was very active in politics in the state of New Hampshire. He had been, and Betty were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration. I had gone with them. I was also invited. This is before anyone knew about their events with UFOs. So also Barney was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in 1965. As a state advisory board member, and he had received an award from Sergeant Shriver from the federal poverty program for setting up with others the Rockingham County Community Action Program in 1965 again. And so they were very, very busy in local politics, state politics, the civil rights movement, and did not want their information released because they were highly credible people. They did not want to be perceived as a couple of kooks. And additionally, they were doing so much good work. They didn't want this story out, so the focus would be on that. So there was all of that information, everything that I had learned in many years, but I wanted to go back. I wanted to reinvestigate all of this, doing an original investigation along the route that they traveled, the entire route that they traveled in that time frame, driving on the same roads, even though there are new highways now. We traveled on the same roads. I wanted to read all of the historical files that pertained to their case, the Air Force files, the NICAP files, letters to and from scientists, the scientists that my aunt and uncle met with. And I had met many of those along the way because they always brought scientists to the family homestead where I grew up. I grew up right across the street from Betty's parents. And my mother was Betty's sister, so I had all of that. And so I started a very, very long investigation and slowly writing this book. I thought I would write Betty's biography, So that was the first thing that I pursued. But over time, I came to the conclusion that I had to add the UFO part of it, because that was there in her life and it had such a huge impact. So I did as meticulous a job as I could, interviewing the original investigators who were still alive, interviewing Stanton Friedman, and who was very actively involved in the investigation and vetting of the star map, that identification that was done by a brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, who was an amateur astronomer. So I had all of that. My background is in sociology, social research, and social work. So, and Stanton's background was in physical science. He was a physicist, a nuclear physicist. So I wanted to combine my research and his research together to present a well-rounded, objective, unbiased book on my findings and Stanton's findings. So that's what we did. We cooperated over about 3 years. Once he came onto the picture, I'd already written a script for a lot of the book already, but I did some changing around. My book was too long for my publisher. And so we had a lot of work to do together to write this book. We wanted to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if we came to the conclusion that Betty and Barney had actually made a mistake, that this was something other than what they thought it was, we were going to present that information as well.
Right, right. Well, what was some of the new findings that you eventually came up with and published in the update?
Well, the new findings pertained to DNA testing, to new chemical analyses on Betty's dress with some really exciting findings, a simple study that was done on with a group of experiencers that the great researcher, deceased researcher now, Bud Hopkins, had done with Dr. Don Derry and Dr. Philip Appel. And so that information is in there, and also their comparison to the symbols that I asked Betty to sketch for me back in the year 2000. So that there's a new update on the star map. There's a tremendous amount of new information in this book. So I'm really excited about that.
I think two of the fascinating chapters in the book are about Betty's star map and also her dress. Can you talk a little bit about those without giving away too much?
Yes. When Betty arrived home from their trip on September 20th, 1961, she noticed that her dress was torn in several places. The lining was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on one side. The top of the zipper that ran up the back of the dress had a 2-inch tear in the stitching and a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. This was very perplexing because she didn't remember how any of this happened. It had been in very good condition. In fact, it was fairly new when she put it on the previous day. So she placed that dress in her closet knowing that it had to be restitched, it had to be repaired, and she kind of forgot about it. But the next time she took it out, it was covered with a pink powdery substance. Not all of the dress, just part of the dress. Around the hemline, around the arms. It was a short sleeve dress at the top of the zipper, but it was the normal color around the lower bodice and upper skirt part of it. So she thought about throwing the dress away because at this point she realized it was ruined, but she decided to keep it in case it held a clue to what happened to her on that night where she had these memories of finding herself on a dirt road with tall trees all around and a roadblock and a fiery orb, all kinds of these memories, and missing time, about 2 hours of time that couldn't be accounted for. And so she kept the dress, and it has undergone scientific analysis several times, I think probably 7 or 8 times at this point. And so there's more information in the new book, but this is something that has defied explanation to this point. So I think that the readers will be very interested in that. And also, under hypnosis, back in 1964, with Dr. Benjamin Simon, a neuropsychiatrist who was famous in his field for developing a new type of hypnosis technique that he used highly successfully on his patients to resolve physiological problems that were psychogenically induced. And Barney was the one who suffered from this. But he went to the crux of the matter of what was causing all of these problems in a person's life, related not only to what they identified as this UFO abduction, but what in their past life might have been there as a trauma to contribute to the huge trauma that Barney had. Okay, so Barney was the primary patient. Betty was the secondary patient. Dr. Simon hypnotized them separately and reinstated amnesia at the end of each session over a period of about 4 months, so that he could compare their statements separately, but they would not remember their statements until he allowed them to at the end. And he was able to do psychotherapy with them to help to resolve this conflict. So getting back to your question, on the craft, Betty had undergone her physiological exams, put her dress back on, and she was left alone in the room with the one that she called the leader. And she had lost her fear of him. The examiner had gone into the room that Barney was in. Betty didn't know that at the time, but that's what happened. So Betty said to the leader, "I know you're not from around here. Where is your home port?" And he produced this 3-dimensional star map that almost looked like she was looking out a window into space. And some of the stars on this map were connected by solid lines. There were 2 large stars in the foreground. There were several more stars that were the size of pinheads. So there were stars that were connected by 2 solid lines, stars that connected by 3 solid lines. That was only 1. And then there were stars that were connected by broken lines, dotted lines. And she was made to understand that the solid lines represented trade routes, the dotted lines represented expeditions.
Wow.
So this star map was published in the first book that was ever written on Betty and Barney's experience. It was written by John G. Fuller, a mainstream writer, after the violation of confidentiality in the Boston newspaper. So Betty and Barney cooperated with John Fuller, as did Dr. Simon. And so the book was published. The star map was in the book. Marjorie Fish read the book, saw the star map, and thought that perhaps she would be able to find the home base of these non-humans who abducted Betty and Barney. And she was skeptical at the beginning. but she did an extraordinary job. These were the days before computers. So she had a tremendous amount of work to do with the university and in building models of our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years from the sun in every direction. She was building three-dimensional models. And in one model, she put 253 stars in their proper location. She had to know the types of stars, the distance data in that time frame. And still, after several years, with 14 models, she didn't have a match. So, originally she thought she'd find several matches, but she just couldn't. Well, then in the end of 71 and into 1972, she went to the university again, and we had made scientific progress. We now had more accurate distance data. So Marjorie then did another model. And in this model, she used the new distance data. And she was able to find a match for Betty's map. Well, Stanton became involved in all of this, and he was the one who wrote the chapter on the star map. And he was able to find scientists who were willing to vet Marjorie's work. They did vet her work, and they discovered that it was accurate. And not only was it accurate, but there were very special properties regarding the stars on Betty's map. So what the scientists did find is that all of the stars on Betty's map, connected by lines, are sun-like stars. Although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years are sun-like. That's what we knew at that time. Also, all of the sun-like stars are on Betty's map. And the stars have special properties because they are all in a plane, like pepperoni on a pizza, as opposed to raisins in a loaf of raisin bread. Being on a plane means that it makes sense that if you were to travel from star to star, you would go in that direction because it's the easiest, fastest way to go. So all of this made sense. So that was extraordinary. It caused a lot of scientists and astronomers to believe that Betty and Barney actually had a real experience.
So to the ordinary layman, has this area that Betty identified on her map got a name?
Yes. The two stars in the foreground are Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. They can be seen only from the southern hemisphere, and they're very dim stars, I understand. They are in the constellation Reticulum. The net is what this means.
The actual aliens themselves did Betty and Barney describe what they looked like?
Betty and Barney did describe what they looked like. There were two separate groups. One group were your typical short grays with very large heads in comparison to their bodies, very thin limbs, eyes that just kind of stared. They were the ones who operated as the abductors, as the assistants, as the guards. They made sure that Betty didn't get off the craft with anything that she wanted to take home with her to prove that this experience occurred. The other group was more humanoid than the smaller ones, or closely resembled the humans as opposed to them. Although they had large heads and larger eyes than we have, that slanted upward, they had flat faces and very narrow chins. They did not have lips. There was only a slit for a mouth.
Wow.
Their nose was not prominent like our noses. It was very flat with only a couple of upturned nostrils. Their I already described the eyes. They described the eyes as being cat-like. They glowed in the dark, and they reminded them very much of cat's eyes. There was no hair on their bodies, on any of the bodies, no ears. So this is essentially the way they appeared. They were described as having barrel-type chests, and
Right.
the examiner and the leader, the one they called the leader, seemed to be in charge of the operation. They had the examining tables there. They had the equipment to do the examination that they wanted to follow. So it gives you an indication that they had been here for a while. And Betty and Barney were probably not the first ones taken. And, you know, I've been a researcher now, an investigator for 30 years. And so Betty and Barney were definitely not the first.
Right.
There were many people who were taken earlier, but none were ever scientifically investigated, and none had the level of evidence that Betty's and Barney's case had.
And one other chapter that caught my eye too, Kathleen, was titled "Betty's Fall from Grace." Can you talk about this?
I can. First of all, I want to say that I went rather hard on Betty in that chapter. It was before I had visited Philip Klass's archives, and Philip Klass was probably the most prolific anti-UFO propagandist of the 20th century. He attacked every credible case. He attacked Betty's and Barney's case. He added speculation and false information, which he promoted. So part of the information I was going on was actually information that was promoted by Philip Klass and other individuals who believed Philip Klass. Well, but I also saw with my own eyes that I thought that Betty was getting carried away. I know that Betty had done quite a long experiment with a team of scientists to see if she could connect or call in UFOs. That's quite common today, and thought to be credible. And in fact, people know it's possible. There are many witnesses. But in Betty's time, the idea was that if you ever even reported more than one UFO sighting, you were not credible.
Wow.
So with Betty calling in craft, she was thought not to be credible, when in fact there was evidence that a craft landed on my grandparents' farm. Within 200 feet of my childhood home, there was physical evidence there. I wrote about it quite skeptically in the book, saying that it was inconclusive. What was inconclusive was the chemical analysis. What was conclusive is that two people observed the craft landing, and there were investigators who came out and witnessed the landing, physical trace evidence on the ground. So, but Betty did go a little overboard, I thought, in accepting too much as being anomalous.
Right.
I went out UFO hunting with her, and what I discovered is she would see a light in the sky that would be coming in, and instead of remaining in the location that we were in, she got into the car and she drove on.
Wow.
So she would interpret it as a UFO, but I think she was frightened that we would be taken. And so I think that this is what happened, but she would report it as observing a UFO when she wasn't really able to identify it as such. And I always wanted to know if it was just an aircraft on a landing pattern going into Logan Airport in Boston, because in that time frame, that was the airport, or Pease Air Force Base. But that was it. So, you know, I had to consider those things, but I thought that she was also friendly with some people who lacked credibility and became overly excited over prosaic phenomena.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that happened as well. So Betty was misinterpreting some information. She was recording it. I do know that this was going on in the 70s, in the 80s, but as time went on, she became more credulous in her, to me.
Mhm.
And, but I also have to forgive her a bit because she had a brain tumor that changed her personality and made her become kind of radical in many ways.
Yeah.
So that happened as well. It's a long story. It's highly complicated. It's
Yep.
in the book, but I know that Philip Klass was instrumental in disseminating false information and false stories about Betty as well. I wrote about it in my book with Stanton Friedman, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers.
Right. Philip Klass, I've heard him described as many things, and most of them pretty colourful, and obnoxious certainly came to mind when you were talking about Philip Klass. But he kind of showed his real colours when he orchestrated a plot to paint Betty as delusional. Did he actually go through with that?
With that plot
Mm-hmm.
to paint Betty as delusional. I don't know if it was Philip Klass or who was doing this, but Betty's home was broken into and very strange things were carried out. I think with the hope that she would report this too, and they would say that Betty was paranoid and delusional.
Right.
And so, I mean, Philip Klass attempted to do this, attempted to paint her as being a delusional person. She was not delusional. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She was a credible, down-to-earth person. She was not delusional, but he wanted this to happen so that she could be painted in this manner. Fortunately, she did not report this when it occurred. In fact, I moved in with her after Barney's death in 1969 and saw some of this myself and came to the conclusion when I caught a man in the act of doing this, he wasn't dressed like a common burglar.
Yeah.
He was dressed in a suit.
Wow. This happened at a time, 1961, straight on from the 50s, when there were a lot of UFO sightings, and UFOs were pretty much on the lips of everyone. But the one thing that people didn't do in the 50s was actually report actually seeing live aliens, because that was almost taboo back then. It was just UFOs, and the UFOs, I think, were considered as being their own intelligence, and they moved around by themselves. But as soon as Betty and Barney reported that, well, their abduction was reported, and they actually mentioned after their hypnosis that they'd actually seen live aliens, that kind of really brought the skeptics on, didn't it?
It did bring in the doubters and the disinformants, I have to say that. So reporting live aliens, that was not known until 1965.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, there was no problem. Betty and Barney were talking to scientists, to military officers who believed the story, and so on and so forth. But in 1965, the last week in October 65, all of that changed, and it did bring out the skeptics and the doubters. And when the movie, The UFO Incident, was made, this is after Barney's death in 1975, he died in 69. This is when Philip Klass really went all out to debunk this case. And he even met with Dr. Simon and threatened him. So there was a lot of kind of counterintelligence going on here to destroy the story and paint Betty and Barney as individuals who were different from the real Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah. How important was it to have Stanton Friedman going into bat for them?
It was extraordinarily important for Stanton to go to bat for them. He had met them, he had interviewed them, he had dinner with them, and he knew that they were credible people, that they didn't enlarge on this story, that they were intelligent. Barney's IQ was 140. Betty was also highly intelligent, but I don't know what her IQ was. She didn't have a test. So it was extraordinarily important because Stanton was a nuclear physicist. People listened when Stanton spoke. He was very patient in doing his research and meticulous with his research as well. So he was a person that the public believed. He wasn't just a UFO investigator or someone who was going to expand on any information that was given. He was scientific.
Yeah, I think it's important that that we keep the Betty and Barney Hill story up front, because it was only as recently as last night I was talking UFOs with a group of people, and there were two young people in the audience, and they had never heard of Betty and Barney Hill. And I'm like, dude, are you kidding? And these guys lived and breathed UFOs, and so I think it's for that reason, you know, books like yours are very important, and they need to be updated and kept in the forefront. But the other thing is what their story did for the alien abduction phenomena overall. I mean, you've got pioneers in every field. I guess I'm not sure whether they wanted to be known as pioneers, but they were, and we've got to a stage now, 60 years later, that this phenomena has almost been normalized.
Yes, it has been almost normalized with the Department of Defense's admission that the video of the Tic Tac and of fuzzy orbs and of what looked like a square with a ball in the center of it, all of these things have been picked up on Navy radar and observed by highly experienced pilots from the Navy, naval officers. And these craft have characteristics that are not present on this planet. Their technology is so far ahead of any technology on this planet that it cannot be just experimental aircraft by anyone here, because these craft move in such a way, make right-angle turns, can drop from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet in a second or two, can then drop to 50 feet above the churn of the ocean, bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball, appear to be communicating with another craft the size of an aircraft carrier underneath the water. All of these things would kill a human being if we, with our current technology on this earth. So the scientists who have been involved in this have stated this information, and I'm repeating what they have stated.
Right. Kathleen, do you think anything is going to come of the UAP UFO report to be presented to Congress?
I hope that new information will be revealed. The problem is that most of the information that pertains to UFOs, I believe, is either top secret or classified above top secret code word. That cannot be declassified without the intelligence community, military intelligence, making the decision that it is safe to do this. So I'm not holding my breath that we're going to get a lot of new information, but I hope that we will. I hope that there is at least some soft disclosure, an admission that we've been studying all of this dating back to 1947, that it was observed in 1946 as well, and that the military has conducted several scientific studies on this. And in one study that was completed in 1952, they did a chi-square analysis, a quality analysis of the reporters. And they attempted to categorize all of these observations into the length of time they were under observation, the credibility of the witness, and what they had actually observed. If it was a true unknown, or if it was a balloon or aircraft or meteorological event or something else, or even a hoax or a psychological event. In the end, 26.94% were stated to be true unknowns. So, and that's in 1952 on a little more than 1,500 cases. The largest study ever done was released in 1955, 3,201 cases. Same kind of study, only more people and more cases. Done at the prestigious Patel Memorial Institute. And in the end, they discovered that 21.5% were true unknowns. So both of these figures are highly significant. And those cases that were under observation for the longest by the most credible witnesses ended up being at a higher percentage in the true unknown category as opposed to insufficient evidence or information.
Right. Yeah. Senator Marco Rubio and others are seen as pretty proactive at the moment through the soft disclosure period. Do you think that a lot of these politicians and people within the government are now trying to get on the right side of disclosure and perhaps looking for a soft landing post-disclosure on the other side of the truth embargo?
Well, I'm not sure that a lot of our Congress people have a great deal of information about any of this. So a congressional inquiry is in order. We've had congressional inquiries in the past, and it really didn't go very far beyond that. But it is apparently a national defense problem for the military, the Department of Defense, and also, I'm sure, the intelligence community. So Congress needs to know about this. They should know about it. What I have to say about that is, even though they're in our airspace, they have not intentionally done harm to anyone. They've been here for a very long time. They haven't conquered us. They have been abducting humans and having friendly contact with humans too for a long period of time. But so far, they're not eating us. They're not killing us. They're not enslaving us. And so this is all good news regarding their presence.
Yeah.
In fact, they are telling experiencers. I've worked on 3 major studies with experiencers. And what they are saying is that they are here because they are concerned about our development, that our technological progress is out of sync with our spiritual growth. And when this happens, it causes a problem where you could end up having a nuclear war that would destroy our environment. It could cause an environmental collapse. And so they're just watching us and trying to make some changes in the humans that they have worked with so that their agenda, which is to save the human race, can be carried out. But they're trying not to interfere too much with what is going on, too. They don't want to cause disruption in our lives.
I guess most people are expecting disclosure to come out of the United States on UFOs. What would happen if another country kind of snuck in there first and declared to the world, yes, UFOs and aliens are real. We have the evidence. How would that affect the credibility of for the US?
Well, there are other countries. The former Minister of Defense in Israel came out recently and stated that he had been in contact with UFOs and non-humans. The former Secretary of Defense in Canada also made that statement several years ago, that he was aware of various groups of ETs that are here. But no one in the federal government addressed these statements. There were some doubtful researchers who said they didn't believe it. They thought that these people were trying to sell books
Right.
instead of telling the truth, which seems ridiculous to me. Why would you destroy your reputation by making something up to sell books when you had such a credible background? I'm aware that down in Peru, there is a group who are able to call in UFOs. There have been many journalists who have gone there, and people who have seen the craft come up, rise up out of the ocean, travel to the location where these people are standing, and these people have been able to observe the non-humans on the craft. So a lot of things have been going on that the US government has not addressed. Everyone's been fairly quiet, as far as I know, since about 2013, when they stopped debunking all of this on a regular basis.
Right. As director of the experiencer research team at MUFON, Kathleen, last time we spoke, you mentioned you were getting 100 calls or more a month. Have those calls increased since we last spoke?
As far as I know, they have not increased. I'm no longer the director of experiencer research for the Mutual UFO Network. I retired recently. I intend to continue with my work. I'm now a consultant to that team, but I have an extraordinarily busy schedule, and I simply did not have time for that volunteer work, which was very time consuming as well. So I'm remaining in the field as a researcher, as an author, as an on-camera commentator, and all of that. I also do work with some experiencers, and so I'm continuing with that. But MUFON, with their wonderful investigative team of 45 very kind individuals, intelligent, well-read individuals, talk with experiencers on a day-to-day basis. And if experiencers want to speak with a member of MUFON's experiencer resource team, all they have to do is go to MUFON.com, MUFON.com, scroll down to experiencer resource team, click on that, click on complete the experiencer questionnaire, very short, 30 yes and no questions, and you will be assigned one of these kind, compassionate individuals to have a conversation with.
Yep, and it's done in total confidence and a safe environment.
It is done in confidence, so that's very important to anybody, that you can trust these people. They're not going to talk to you and then reveal your information on radio show or something like that.
Yep. Kathleen, the book is titled Capture the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. It's out now, it's been updated, and it's a great read.
Yes, it's the 60th anniversary edition of the
Mhm.
book. So you see
Okay.
this little flag here.
It's fantastic. Is that a hard copy?
No, this is a soft cover.
Okay.
Like the first, I think that they've put out a hardcover too under a different title. I know I have about 10 titles,
Right.
but some of them are just were sold to people who published them in hardcover, I guess library copies under a different title.
Kathleen, thanks for your time once again. Hope to be speaking with you again.
My pleasure. Nice to speak with you again. Take
Kathleen
care.
Martin joining us today.